Welcome, all brothers and sisters in Christ, to Soulful Scriptures Every Day.
Yes, welcome everyone.
So today, I want you to just imagine waking up tomorrow morning, you finish your coffee, you walk out to your car, and you know with absolute certainty that just the simple act of driving to your office makes you the prime target for an organized syndicate of assassins.
It's terrifying to even think about.
Right. And you don't have an army. You don't have a fortified bunker. You just have, well, your convictions, your faith, and a seat at a political table where half the people despise everything you stand for.
Yeah, I mean, it completely redefines the whole concept of a morning commute, right? Like, you're talking about a level of psychological pressure that most of us literally cannot even compute.
Exactly. So today on the Deep Dive, we are looking at a life lived entirely inside that pressure cooker. We're examining the trajectory of Shahbaz Bhatti.
Oh, truly incredible figure.
Yeah, he was a Pakistani cabinet minister, actually the only Christian in the federal cabinet at the time, who made the ultimate sacrifice defending religious minorities. We're pulling from this incredibly detailed retrospective article in the Catholic World Report.
Which was written looking back 10 years after his martyrdom.
Right. But, our goal here isn't just to recite a biography for you. As hardcore, faithful believers, we really want to understand the architecture of this kind of courage. What are the actual mechanics of putting your life on the line for your community in, well, one of the most volatile geopolitical landscapes on Earth?
And, to understand that architecture, we really have to look at the foundation. So, for our blueprint today, first we're going to look at his background and his dangerous rise in Pakistani politics.
Which is a crazy story on its own.
Oh, absolutely. Then we'll examine the specific tipping point, the controversy with Asia Bibi and his tragic assassination. Third, we'll dive into the deeply personal and spiritual legacy he left behind. And finally, we'll assess the sobering reality of religious freedom in Pakistan today, 10 years after he died.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because think of your own daily faith practice. For most of us, it's a source of comfort, right?
Yeah, a refuge.
Exactly. But what if your faith and, your defense of others' right to practice theirs put a literal target on your back every single time you walked out the front door? How do we even begin to comprehend that level of daily existential pressure?
Well, Shahbaz Bhatti didn't just emerge fully formed into the halls of the National Assembly. He served as Pakistan's Federal Minister of Minorities Affairs from 2008 until he was assassinated in 2011. He was just 42.
Wow, 42.
Yeah, incredibly young for that level of influence. But his roots were entirely in grassroots activism. He founded Pakistan's Christian Liberation Front and also the All Pakistan Minorities Alliance movement.
Okay, let's pause right there because, grassroots activism in the West usually means holding a clipboard outside a supermarket or maybe organizing a peaceful march.
Right, sending an email campaign.
Yeah. Grassroots activism in Pakistan, specifically regarding religious minorities, is a completely different universe of risk.
It's an entirely different ecosystem. The organizations Bhatti founded were specifically designed to fight against the misuse of Pakistan's strict blasphemy laws.
And those laws are brutal.
They are. To understand what he was fighting, you have to understand how these laws are actually weaponized on the ground. We aren't talking about high-minded theological debates happening in university classrooms.
No, not at all.
The blasphemy laws, specifically sections of the Pakistan Penal Code, like 295B and 295C, they carry life imprisonment or the death penalty.
The death penalty, just for alleged words.
Exactly. And the evidentiary threshold is just terrifyingly low.
Right, so it's not like you need a video recording of someone, desecrating a religious text. It often just requires a verbal accusation.
A single claim.
Yeah.
And because the threshold is so low, the law is routinely used to settle personal vendettas, property disputes, or business rivalries.
Oh, wow. So it's basically a tool for theft or revenge.
Yeah. Say someone wants a Christian farmer's land. They just accuse him of blasphemy. The local police, who are often under immense pressure from local clerics, and frankly terrified of mob violence themselves, will arrest the accused simply to appease the crowd.
So the mob gets the land, and the accused goes to jail.
Or worse, they are often murdered before the trial even begins. This is the structural, bureaucratic monster that Bhatti was organizing against.
Which brings us to the actual human cost of that monster. The article mentions Benedict Rogers, an East Asia analyst for the human rights group CSW.
Yes, he worked really closely with Bhatti.
from 2004 to 2009. So he basically watched Bhatti transition from the streets to the cabinet, and Rogers recalls the specific meeting they took with a 7-year-old Christian girl and her family.
That part was devastating to read.
It really was. She had been brutally raped and tortured simply because of her religious background.
Just think about the psychological impact of sitting in that room. When you sit across from a traumatized child who has absorbed the absolute worst of systemic hatred, your activism fundamentally changes.
It's not abstract anymore.
Exactly. It ceases to be about policy papers or political theory. It becomes an inescapable moral imperative. Bhatti wasn't a politician who occasionally read reports about human rights abuses. His entire worldview was forged by looking directly into the eyes of the victims he was trying to save.
And he didn't just, advocate after the fact. He actively inserted himself right into the danger.
He really did.
In 2007, Bhatti and Rogers were involved in this incident where a Christian community was being threatened with forced conversion. An extremist attack was anticipated, and Bhatti physically went there.
He physically went to the village to de-escalate it.
The mechanics of stopping a mob in that context, it's incredibly complex. You can't just call 911.
No, well, the police might be siding with the mob.
Right. So you have to leverage local relationships, bring in international observers like Rogers to act as a deterrent, and physically place your own body between the threat and the victims.
You have to shame or pressure the local authorities into actually doing their jobs, and they successfully prevented the attack that day.
But every time you do that, you put a new name on your own death warrant.
Absolutely.
So it's one thing to shout from the outside as an activist, but it's another to step into the belly of the beast. In 2008, he takes the job as Federal Minister of Minorities Affairs.
He steps right into the establishment.
It's like a whistleblower taking a job on the board of directors of the very company they are investigating. How did he balance the righteous anger of his grassroots base with the delicate, high-stakes diplomacy required of a cabinet minister?
Well, it's the classic dilemma of institutional change, but with lethal stakes. Bhatti clearly believed that street protests could only go so far.
You eventually need a pen to change the law.
Exactly. To actually dismantle the blasphemy laws, or at least reform their application, he needed a seat at the legislative table. But taking that seat meant he had to shake hands with people who fundamentally opposed his existence.
That takes an incredible amount of compartmentalization.
It really does. He had to play the diplomatic game in Islamabad while maintaining his credibility with the terrified communities in rural Punjab.
And taking that seat also made him the most visible target in the entire country, which really brings us to the tipping point.
The Asia Bibi case.
Yes. If Bhatti's cabinet position put a target on his back, his defense of Asia Bibi illuminated that target with a massive floodlight.
It was the point of no return.
Let's look at the mechanics of this case because it perfectly illustrates what you were saying earlier about how these laws are weaponized. In 2010, Asia Bibi, a Pakistani Christian woman, was sentenced to death for blasphemy.
And how did it start? It wasn't a protest or a theological debate.
No, it started over a cup of water. She was working in a field. She drank water from a shared cup, and a coworker claimed she had made the water unclean because she was Christian.
Just horrifying bigotry.
An argument broke out. Days later, an accusation of blasphemy was formally filed against her.
It's the banality of the origin that makes it so terrifying. A squabble among farm workers spirals into a death sentence that captures global attention.
She sat on death row for 8 years before the Supreme Court finally acquitted her in 2018.
8 years.
Yeah.
But back in 2010, when the death sentence was first handed down, the international outcry was deafening, and the domestic tension inside Pakistan was at an absolute boiling point.
And Bhatti did what he always did. He didn't issue a watered-down, cautious diplomatic press release.
No. He loudly and publicly defended her.
He stood up and said her conviction was a gross injustice. And the death threats against him, which had always been sort of a background hum, suddenly became a roaring siren.
We really have to contextualize the environment he was operating in at that specific moment. The blasphemy law had become the ultimate third rail of Pakistani politics.
To touch it was political suicide.
And very often literal suicide. We know this because of what happened to Salman Taseer.
The Punjab governor.
Yes. Salman Taseer was a high-ranking, powerful Muslim politician. He also recognized the absurdity of Asia Bibi's conviction and publicly called for the blasphemy laws to be reformed.
He used his platform.
And in January 2011, just 1 month before Bhatti was killed, Taseer was assassinated.
And the chilling part is how he was assassinated. Oh.
Right. He wasn't killed by a shadowy terrorist group in a back alley. He was shot in broad daylight in an upscale market in Islamabad by his own elite police bodyguard.
Oh, man. The very apparatus designed to protect him was the thing that killed him.
And it gets worse. When that bodyguard, Mumtaz Qadri, went to court, lawyers threw rose petals at him.
Rose petals. Unbelievable.
They treated the assassin like a national hero. So when the governor of the most populous province is murdered by his own security detail and the assassin is celebrated by the legal community, the message is undeniable.
Nobody is safe.
Exactly. The state cannot protect you, even if it wants to.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, and I want to push back on this concept of inevitability. With the Punjab governor killed just a month prior, the writing wasn't just on the wall, it was in bold letters.
He was carved in stone.
Bhatti sees this. He watches Taseer get murdered, he sees the rose petals, but he doesn't back down. Did Bhatti's decision to stay visible in Islamabad represent a form of conscious martyrdom? Like a refusal to let fear dictate his duty to the people?
It's the perennial question of the advocate, isn't it? Do you preserve the asset, meaning yourself, to fight another day, or do you stay and become the symbol?
Right. If he had fled into exile, moved to London or Toronto, he could have continued lobbying for Asia Bibi from a safe distance.
He could have run the Minorities Alliance for the next 40 years from Canada.
But by staying, he lost his life at 42.
From everything we know about Bhatti from the Catholic World Report, leaving was just never on the table. Fleeing would have signaled to the millions of marginalized people he represented that the system truly was hopeless.
If the minister flees, what hope does the illiterate brick kiln worker have?
Exactly. He stayed because his authority was rooted in shared vulnerability. But yes, he was acutely aware that he was going to die. He wasn't caught off guard.
Which brings us to the events of March 2, 2011, the ultimate sacrifice. Bhatti was gunned down by members of Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan while driving to work in Islamabad.
They ambushed his vehicle.
And the thing that elevates this from a tragic political assassination to a profound theological event is the video he left behind.
The prophetic video. Knowing the threats were closing in, he recorded a message essentially eulogizing his own mission.
Yeah. He stated, and this is a direct quote from the source, "I believe in Jesus Christ, who has given his own life for us, and I am ready to die for a cause. I'm living for my community, and I will die to defend their rights."
I mean, that rhetoric, you just don't hear politicians speak like that.
No, that isn't a policy platform. That is a radical, almost apostolic acceptance of death.
He drew a direct line between the crucifixion of Christ and his own impending assassination. He viewed his death not as a failure of his security detail, but as the inevitable completion of his calling.
His brother, Peter Bhatti, who now chairs the International Christian Voice in Canada, really crystallized this distinction at the memorial they held.
Yeah, Peter noted that many of us make small sacrifices for justice, right? We donate money, maybe we risk our reputation, or we lose a local election.
But Shahbaz made the ultimate sacrifice of his life.
He challenged the forces of violence every single day, refusing to be silenced, knowing exactly what the price tag would be.
But the psychological toll of carrying that knowledge, it's just staggering.
It's unimaginable.
The article gives us a window into this through his nephew, David Bhatti. David shared that his uncle had this incredible charm. He loved to laugh. He said he always radiated such happiness.
But underneath that joy, he carried an immense, agonizing grief.
Yeah, he wept over innocent worshippers killed by suicide bombers. He grieved for villagers whose homes were burnt to the ground.
I'm really glad you brought that up because it highlights the profound mechanics of compartmentalization required for this kind of work. Think about walking around with that dual reality.
How does a person compartmentalize the joy of faith with the crushing weight of their community's persecution? How do you sit at a family dinner laughing while knowing a terrorist cell is actively planning your murder?
It requires a spiritual infrastructure that most of us just haven't built. It's the dual reality of the believer in a broken world. You're holding the eternal joy of faith in one hand and the immediate weight of earthly injustice in the other.
David Bhatti said his uncle's dream of a world with dignity for all people was born out of a faith that conquers fear.
And that faith is precisely why his story didn't end in that bullet-riddled car. The ripple effects of his death immediately caught the attention of the global church and the highest levels of international diplomacy.
Right. The Catholic Church has actually declared him a servant of God, and his cause for beatification is under consideration.
Which is huge.
Let's unpack the implications of that for the listener. The beatification process is the rigorous investigation by the Vatican to officially recognize someone as a saint or a martyr.
Yes.
But to have this happen for a modern political figure, someone operating in the 21st century geopolitical arena, that sends a massive signal, doesn't it?
It sends a profound structural message. By initiating this process so quickly, the global church is essentially putting a formal seal on his life's work.
Validating it.
Exactly. It states that fighting against unjust legal systems and protecting human rights isn't just secular work, it is holy work.
And there are physical, tangible symbols of this reverence now. Benedict Rogers noted that whenever he goes to Rome, he visits the Basilica of San Bartolomeo all'Isola.
Such a powerful location.
Because Shahbaz Bhatti's personal Bible is on display there.
The specific basilica is vital context here. San Bartolomeo was dedicated by Pope John Paul II to the new martyrs of the 20th and 21st centuries.
So it's not just sitting in a random museum.
No, it is placed in a living space of worship explicitly designed to recognize modern persecution. Rogers says he uses it as a focal point to pray for places of religious intolerance.
It's fascinating that his impact crossed so many denominational lines, too. From Catholic cardinals to the Anglican archbishop. It's as if his sacrifice acted as a universal translator for the global Christian community.
That's a great way to put it.
But I have to ask, does placing his Bible behind glass in Rome risk turning a man of vigorous street-level action into just a sanitized historical relic? Or does it amplify his ongoing mission?
That's a really valid concern with any kind of memorialization. But I think the physical artifact grounds the abstract concept of martyrdom.
It makes it real.
Right. When pilgrims see the actual dog-eared pages he read for comfort while receiving death threats from the Taliban, it removes the historical distance.
It proves that martyrdom isn't just something that happened to people wearing tunics in the Roman Colosseum.
Exactly. It happens to guys in business suits driving to the office in Islamabad.
And the reverence wasn't just confined to the Vatican. Justin Welby, the Anglican Archbishop of Canterbury, praised his extraordinary moral imagination.
He pointed out that Bhatti's death didn't just challenge Christians. It posed a direct moral challenge to Muslims and to the Pakistani government alike.
Which brings up a critical historical point made by Joseph Cardinal Coutts, the Archbishop Emeritus of Karachi.
Right. Cardinal Coutts stressed that Bhatti's work wasn't anti-Pakistan.
This is so important. Let's explain that. When Muhammad Ali Jinnah founded Pakistan in 1947, his inaugural address to the Constituent Assembly explicitly promised absolute religious freedom.
Yes.
He said, "You are free to go to your temples. You are free to go to your mosques or to any other place of worship in this state of Pakistan."
So what Cardinal Coutts is pointing out is that Bhatti wasn't some radical trying to dismantle the nation. He was a constitutional purist trying to drag the nation back to its founding promise.
The extremists who killed him are the actual deviants from the state's original charter.
Exactly. And that perspective really resonated in the halls of international diplomacy. The 10-year memorial we've been discussing was hosted by the Religious Freedom Institute in Washington, D.C., and it was flooded with high-level politicians.
It was a massive event. Knox Thames, who was a State Department special advisor for religious minorities, wrote in Christianity Today that compared to Bhatti's efforts, the work of mere mortals in the State Department feels inadequate.
Bishop David Malloy from the U.S. Bishops' Committee on International Justice and Peace recalled arranging meetings for Bhatti in the U.S. back in 2009.
And Bishop Malloy highlighted something crucial about Bhatti's methodology.
He didn't just champion Christians.
Right. He fought for Hindus, Sikhs, Ahmadi Muslims, anyone marginalized by these laws.
He wasn't playing tribal politics. He was fighting for the fundamental mechanics of human rights.
Benedict Rogers corroborated this, noting that in his final months, Bhatti was actively visiting mosques and building relationships with Islamic clerics.
The sheer danger of interfaith dialogue in that context just cannot be overstated. For Bhatti to walk into a mosque and for an imam to welcome him required immense bravery from both parties.
It wasn't about holding hands and singing songs. It was high-stakes negotiation to try and lower the temperature on the streets.
But this brings us to the friction point of foreign policy. We have Gail Manchin, the chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom.
Yes, she noted that her commission brought him to D.C., gave him an award, and introduced him to policymakers.
Now, as always, we are just impartially reporting what the source material states here. We aren't taking a political side on international sanctions, but Gail Manchin explicitly called for targeted U.S. sanctions against the Pakistani government agencies responsible for enforcing these laws, noting that his killers have never been prosecuted.
And we also saw praise from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the UN Special Rapporteur Ahmed Shahid, former Ambassador Sam Brownback, and Senator Tim Kaine.
Former Representative Frank Wolf also spoke, recalling Bhatti asking him for prayer just before his death, calling him a giant of the faith who laid down his life for his friends.
So what does this all mean? We have this massive outpouring of international support and high-level meetings in D.C. before he died. But as a listener, you have to wonder, does all this diplomatic praise and machinery actually protect a person on the ground?
Or does it just raise their profile to the extremists who want to silence them?
Does international visibility act as a shield or a target?
It is the brutal paradox of international human rights work. You need the international spotlight to pressure the local government and secure funding for your organizations.
You have to raise awareness.
But the moment you accept an award in Washington, the hardline clerics back home print pamphlets claiming you are an agent of the CIA or a traitor trying to westernize the country.
So the visibility that was meant to protect Bhatti undeniably fueled the narrative that got him killed.
And when we look at the results 10 years later, that paradox becomes even more sobering.
Have all the memorials, all the U.S. State Department declarations actually changed the machinery on the ground?
Well, the institutional metrics suggest a severe regression. Religious freedom in Pakistan has worsened in the 10 years since his death.
Which is a tough pill to swallow.
Since 2018, the U.S. State Department has officially designated Pakistan as a country of particular concern regarding religious freedom.
And Open Doors, an organization that tracks persecution globally, put them on their World Watch list, ranking Pakistan among the top 5 worst countries in the world for Christians. Why did it get worse? If the whole world watched this horrific assassination, why didn't it spark a massive reform?
Because the underlying power dynamics didn't change. Gail Manchin lamented the increase in violent extremism and the continued enforcement of blasphemy laws.
Now, Archbishop Welby did offer a sliver of nuance in the article.
Yes, he did.
He reported that friends in Pakistan claim the government is working behind the scenes to improve the situation for religious groups.
So there is a tension between quiet, bureaucratic attempts at reform and the loud, violent reality of the street.
But for the people living there, the statistics paint a grim picture. Peter Bhatti pleaded with the memorial attendees not to take human equality and religious freedom for granted and to actively join the struggle to support these suffering communities.
But this is where the rubber meets the road for the advocate. It's like planting a seed and watching a drought roll in. A man gives his life, and 10 years later, the statistics show the situation has actually gotten worse.
How do you, as an advocate or a believer, maintain hope and keep working when the immediate evidence suggests the darkness is winning?
You maintain hope by shifting your timeline. Knox Thames emphasized that our humble contributions can make a difference, urging people to ask God where they can act, whether locally or internationally.
The reality is, if your goal is immediate geopolitical victory, you will burn out and despair.
But if you view your actions as obedience to a moral imperative, the outcome isn't the sole measure of success. It's the difference between being a pragmatist and being a prophet.
The pragmatist quits when the data looks bad.
And the prophet continues because the action itself is right, trusting the eternal narrative.
Let's pull all of this together. We've traced Shahbaz Bhatti's incredible evolution. He wasn't born a statesman. He was forged in the grassroots trauma of marginalized communities.
We explored the mechanics of the blasphemy laws he fought against.
And how his unwavering defense of Asia Bibi, even after the assassination of Governor Taseer, sealed his fate.
We broke down the profound, Christ-like theology of his martyrdom, the complex paradox of international diplomacy, and the sobering reality that the systemic issues in Pakistan are even more entrenched 10 years later.
It is a dense, challenging legacy.
But it's one that demands introspection rather than just observation. Which brings me to a final provocative thought for the listener to carry with them today.
Lay it on us.
Shahbaz Bhatti sat down, looked into a camera, and recorded a video calmly stating the core belief for which he was fully prepared to die.
Yeah.
He knew the cost, and he articulated it clearly. If someone handed you a camera today and asked you to record a video stating the core conviction that you would willingly give up your comfort, your safety, or even your life to defend.
Oh, what would your video say?
Exactly. What would your video say?
That is a staggering question. Do we have convictions that deep, or just preferences that are comfortable? We want to thank all of you, brothers and sisters in Christ, for joining us on this exploration of the Catholic World Report article.
Yes, thank you for listening.
Take that question with you. Examine the foundations of what you truly believe. Carry the torch of faith and courage into your daily lives, and keep standing in the light. This concludes our deep dive.